You're watching 12 WKRC TV, a new generation of news. 12 Newsmakers starts now.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. Cincinnati is renowned for its parks and green space. Armed with a plan developed by nationally renowned George Kessler in 1907, over a 50-year period, the Cincinnati Park Board developed an admirable system of parks and parkways. The crown jewels are still Eden Park, Mount Airy Forest, and parts of Columbia Parkway. For the past 11 years, the park system has been headed by Jack Wilson. One of his contributions has been to lead the development of a new strategic plan for the parks. We are taping Newsmakers on Friday, and this is Jack's last day. He is headed west to become the director of Metro Parks in Tacoma, Washington. I invited him on to Newsmakers as a sort of exit interview with the public. Jack, welcome to Newsmakers.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You know, you're now going on. You've come from another place. You're not a Cincinnati person. You came here. You've been here for a substantial period of time. You're now moving to Tacoma. From that more comparative perspective, what are Cincinnati's assets from the parks, in terms of our Cincinnati parks? Yeah. What are our assets?
Well, as you mentioned in your introduction, Cincinnati is extremely fortunate. It has one of the finest urban park systems in this country. It's very special. It has really strong historical character. We have an abundance of green space. Geographically, it's balanced across the entire city, and I think any other urban area would be hard-pressed to match up with what Cincinnati has to offer in terms of parks.
So there is reason. I mean, it's not just parochialism to say that we're proud of this park system.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's well documented, and just last 2 weeks ago, we had a delegation from Chicago coming down because they were impressed with our park system, the mayor's office, etc. So it's known nationally as one of the finest parks systems in the country.
On the other side, what would you say are some of our weaknesses at this point in the park system?
Well, I think we still are a little concerned about the vulnerability of funding, and that certainly predicates and really demands some vigilance in terms of putting in place a stable funding mechanism.
What is the funding mechanism right now? Is there the Hamilton County parks, for example, have their own levy that flows into the parks. Right. What about Cincinnati?
We're very dependent on the city tax base for funding. We generate through trust funds, through fees and charges, perhaps another 20% of our overall budget. But a large portion of our budget is up against competing with other city services. So that's always vulnerable, especially in bad economic times. It's not uncommon for us to be the first agency or the first service cut and the last funded. So that is really something that the next administration needs to keep looking at, needs to put in place. The Parks Foundation is on board. We're going to have good partnerships with the private sector. We need better collaboration with the public sector as well. There's a lot of things that we ought to be doing with the county and other service providers.
And
Absolutely.
That's one of the things in the new master plan that was talked about, right, and has been talked about constantly throughout the 90s, throughout your term here. Right. Better cooperation relationship to the Hamilton County parks. Some people have even talked about that as a merger. Does that make sense?
I think the minimum that needs to be considered, Dan, is at least a study of all the options. People are still somewhat parochial, as you say. I mean, the greenways and the wildlife corridors and the park services, they really know no political boundaries, for goodness sake. We ought to be working to develop the most comprehensive, efficient delivery of park services that will benefit everyone. The city system serves a regional population in many cases.
Yeah, lots of people come to Mount Airy Forest or Eden Park, or Crone Conservatory.
Absolutely. So why shouldn't we, and wouldn't the citizens and the taxpayers appreciate an effort of bringing together the service providers?
Well, you know, this is here are two systems. Both systems well respected.
Yes.
The county park system certainly well respected. The city park system well respected. We love to talk about regionalism and cooperation across lines. What holds up right now? What's holding up significant new steps in cooperation, or even merger, but just cooperation?
Actually, I think we're really in good position to move forward with that. There needs to be the political will, however. There needs to be an understanding that it deserves some consideration. And merger is not necessarily something that I advocate. Okay. But we now have an opportunity to design, develop, and build probably the most significant park in the last 50 years in this community that's going to be very regional oriented.
We're talking about the Riverfront Park,
The
right?
Central Riverfront.
And I think we've got a little bit of tape of some of the early plans of this. Go ahead.
$65 million park requiring maintenance, support, etc., and in the long term will truly be the most positive, lasting impact on the Central Riverfront. No question.
And right now, who's responsible for planning, developing, and implementing that?
Well, the City Park Board has taken the lead in terms of the planning, but we want to be inclusive. We want to bring all the stakeholders involved, and we have done that for the most part. But the funding mechanism seriously ought to be more regional in nature, because this is not just a city park.
And if it doesn't become more regional in nature, can we do the things that are being talked about?
I think so. I think after it's all said and done and $1 billion is being spent on the Central Riverfront and you don't have the park in place, people are not going to be happy, because they recognize out of all that effort down on the Central Riverfront, the park is the public's facility, unlike any other facility that's being built. And it's going to generate more people and actually generate more economic impact over the long term than anything else.
You know, one of the things I think from the Hamilton County Park Board perspective is that in talking about cooperation, one of the things that I think was raised was that Cincinnati maybe would sell a couple of its parks or green spaces that are relative, like out in Sailor Park, the Fernbank Park. And that just sort of didn't go anywhere because it became a non-starter. What's the problem there, and is there still a potential?
I think there's still a potential. I think the talks broke down because we weren't able to get over that particular hump, that there was that position of we want to buy it, we want to operate it under our policies. And the county really, I think, has interest. We've got to get back to the table to talk about how we can work together, look at a mechanism and a structure to make sure that we represent the folks of Cincinnati, that it's not necessarily going to be operated in the manner that the suburban park system is allowed to operate.
And what would be the difference there? What would be the problem?
I think one of the areas that we need to be cognizant of and fair about is that the suburban park system really serves a different kind of populace, a public that's willing to pay for their services. They're very revenue oriented, and they should be.
Golf courses.
Golf courses, access to parks you pay for, et cetera, et cetera. And that's well done. They do an excellent job, and there's no criticism about that. But we are in a different situation, and we need to be sensitive about who we serve, and we shouldn't exclude anybody from our parks because of their economic status.
You know, just another way of looking at this political relationships thing. Lots of people talk about the park board, which is a semi-autonomous board. I mean, you're part of the city government, but you have a semi-autonomous board. You actually answer to the park board, not to the city manager in these past 11 years, if I understand the structure correctly. And some people have said that's a problem. We should rationalize it all, make the parks just a part of the city system, put the director of the parks under the city manager. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that's a bad direction. I believe that the park board, quite frankly, ought to be a little bit more independent, and they will be independent if they develop their own funding mechanism, because that's what keeps us dependent on city, is the source of funding.
Develop their own funding mechanisms. Does that mean an independent tax stream?
That means the private sector involvement and participation through the Parks Foundation, generating and enhancing our trust funds. That means maybe combining and working with the county in terms of enhanced levy. Their levy is up in 2 or 3 years. What an opportunity.
So an enhanced levy, in a sense, a levy that wouldn't just raise money for the county parks, but also for the city parks.
Sure, exactly.
Okay.
And the other side of it is many are quite confident and really feel strongly that if it was under the effective control of the city system, the system wouldn't be as grand as it is today. We wouldn't have the kind of park system we would have today. We need to be frank about that, because the two-year politician, quite frankly, is on a short-term kind of agenda. But the park board has been stewards, and they look at it much longer, and they have a greater appreciation for preserving open space.
You know, and in fact, I want to move on to something because we're going to run out of time, but the idea of having to buy green space, develop it with that long-term view. Green space is a long-term investment. I mean, it's not just a short-term. But, you know, when you're talking about politicians, let's talk about probably one of the more colorful events during your tenure here, the proposal for the Crystal Forest to move Crone Conservatory. In fact, there's an image out of the strategic, well, here's what the Crystal Forest material looked like. The idea of putting it on top of the proposed new Lazarus store. This was the big thing for a while, and then all of a sudden the politicians switched on you. What did that experience tell you about Cincinnati government and how we make decisions here?
Well, it was certainly a learning experience. You called it colorful. That's an understatement. It tells me that in the preliminary work, there's a great deal of effort that needs to be made in terms of bringing folks along and getting the community and the general public behind issues and making sure that there is that kind of support. The Crystal Forest, I think today I'm more convinced than ever once I have seen the results. The most significant piece of real estate in downtown, and quite frankly, I don't think people are that impressed with what we ended up with. And
the relatively low-rise Lazarus store.
Sure.
So are you convinced that the Crystal Forest could have worked?
Oh, absolutely.
Should have worked? You know, in your strategic plan, and we have an image from the strategic plan of a new Crone Conservatory still up in Eden Park in the shape of some pyramids.
Yeah.
And that image I don't think got shown very often to people, and maybe we can get it up here. That's the Eden Park image. Let's go to 8160, I think. And there it is.
Yeah.
I don't think that got shown because
Right.
as soon as that came out, we started talking about the Crystal Forest downtown. Was Crystal Forest a better proposal than that one? And I got to egg you on, with its plastic trees?
Well, that was certainly very unfortunate and misleading because that wasn't the intent. We were going to make it interactive and fun and entertaining, but also very educational. I think the Crystal Forest evolved into something beyond what this was, something that was really going to establish downtown Cincinnati and be an economic engine for the downtown. We think that that concept really grew out of this and became much more than it could have been in Eden Park.
Does the next director have to go back and review what happened there so they know how to deal with this political structure?
Well, I think absolutely they need to understand that, and of course that political structure is going to change in a couple years, so it'll be a different kind of ball game in a couple years.
From your perspective, for the better?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
I'm on the fence with that at the moment.
All right. Thank you very much for being here this morning. Good luck in Tacoma. It's going to be a lot cooler and a lot wetter out there to grow some plants, and I really appreciate what you've done for Cincinnati, and good luck.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. Stay tuned. If this is what you saw over your back fence, what would you do? After the break, residents of the Gray Road will talk about what they would like to do. Welcome back. What happens to that old plaster that has to be torn out to remodel your kitchen, or the concrete from an old parking lot when your factory expands? It goes into a construction and demolition landfill like this one on Gray Road in Winton Place. No biodegradable material like kitchen garbage or yard waste that produce noxious odors or methane gas are permitted, but blowing dust is a constant annoyance. And a modern landfill not only means filling up a valley, it also means that the nearby hills have to be shaved away to create dirt needed to cover the material and bury it, either here or in other landfills. Neighbors along Gray Road, which forms the northern boundary of Spring Grove Cemetery, have fought the landfill for a long time. Now they're trying to raise the alarm in nearby communities like College Hill about a proposed expansion of the landfill. I am joined this morning by two Gray Road residents. Diane Mushaben's house is on Gray Road and backs up against the landfill. She is a member of the Environmental Committee of the Winton Place Community Council that also fought for years to close the Elda landfill. Joseph Rahn lives on Gray Road, where he also operates the family floral business and greenhouses. I invited the owner of the landfill, Roy Schweitzer, to join us on Newsmakers or send a representative. After considering the invitation, he declined. He did, however, send me a statement regarding the landfill. In the letter, Mr. Schweitzer points out that the landfill is scrutinized and regulated by 8 government agencies and bodies, including the Cincinnati Health Department, the Building Department, and the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. He claims the landfill is in compliance with the regulations of all those agencies. Mr. Schweitzer also adds that special soils and clays are being excavated from the landfill and delivered to the Elda landfill for cover, a prerequisite for closing that nearby landfill. Most importantly, Mr. Schweitzer asserts in bold type that no expansion of the existing Gray Road landfill is planned. Diane, Joe, first off, welcome to Newsmakers, but you say there's an expansion. Mr. Schweitzer says there's no expansion. What do you understand? Is there any way of reconciling those two perspectives?
Well, I can tell you, Dan, what we know in the community. We received notification from the City of Cincinnati's Buildings and Inspections Department regarding a permit application submitted by Gray Road Landfill on March 31st, 1999. Okay. We are notified as a part of a routine process where we ask to be alerted to any possible building developments within our community.
And I think we have a visual of what that expansion is going to be.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
This expansion, according to the permit which we received from the City of Cincinnati, the permit application specifies the removal of 144,000 cubic square yards of soil.
Here on this, you can see the green is where the present landfill exists. Is that correct?
Correct.
And the red is the expanded boundaries of that. So a huge amount of cubic yards of dirt. Sounds like a lot. It is a lot. Okay, go ahead.
Correct. It covers an area of about 18 acres, actually.
Okay.
And then the permit application also specifies that they will backfill the area with 197,000 cubic yards of construction and demolition debris, the waste which goes into a landfill like this.
From your perspective, is his statement just wrong? From your perspective, that's all I can ask.
From the facts that I have at this point in time, it would appear that there is some confusion about this. We are operating with the information provided by the city, which says that they are trying to expand. And in fact, we have a July 2nd letter from Mr. Bill Langevin, the head of the Buildings and Inspections Department, where he confirms that the permit application they have is for an expansion of the existing landfill.
Okay. Joe, I also set up this point by trying to explain what this kind of landfill is as opposed to a Rumpke, for example, at least in theory, no biodegradable materials. I also pointed out that in the letter that Mr. Schweitzer sent, there's these 8 agencies that say that supervise this, and he says they're in compliance. As somebody who is along Gray Road, is your view that they're in compliance with all of those rules that as you understand them?
Well, I would say, living on the road all these years, there are a lot of things happening that should not happen.
For example?
The road gets very muddy and dirty in your wet seasons, your winter time. I don't know who is to blame, if it's the city for not doing their part enforcing these things. You have debris on the road. The main problem that we're experiencing where we are on the road at this time is the road itself is deteriorating because of the heavy truck traffic, and the landfill is expanding, so you have more and more of this, and you have a tremendous bang noise when they hit the different spots on the road, all the way up and down the road, and this is all through the day. This is what we're, in our sector of the road, what we're experiencing is the truck problem, created by the type of truck that goes to landfill.
Okay. And we just were on the screen as you were talking, we saw an example of the size of the truck. Very large trucks. We're not just talking about
They're
pickups.
very large trucks with a loose body that bounces every time they hit a bad section of the road.
You know, another sentence in Mr. Schweitzer's letter, and I want to raise this at this point. Furthermore, he says, Gray Road fill is located in an area where the predominant land use is industrial. We have always attempted to be good neighbors to the adjoining property owners. However, and then I want to go on, pull that up a little bit later, his point to me over the phone was people who moved in knew this was industrial, knew this was a possibility, and why is anybody surprised? Now, Joe, how long has your family lived there?
We have been there over 100 years, and my father was involved, I believe it was in the early 60s or late 50s when the zoning was changed. At one time, Gray Road was primarily greenhouse operations all through the area.
Okay, so zoning has changed since the 60s or early 70s?
Yes.
Okay.
And they wanted to preserve the area as much as they could. The best solution they saw would be a light industrial application, not heavy industry or M2. For the most part, through the years, things have gone along very fine. The companies have come in, pretty well. The neighborhood has stayed pretty good with our intentions, I suppose, that they had back in those years. But this landfill definitely does not fit this void.
Diane, supposedly this landfill is only a temporary step leading to the point where this land will have been leveled out, and then an industrial park will be able to be created on the landfill. Do you object to that ultimate goal, or is it this process of getting there, which I presume is a many-year process, maybe a multi-decade process?
No, Dan, we don't object to the idea of a well-run light industrial park. As Joe mentioned, the sort of industries which go into an M1 zoned area, which is our section of Gray Road, are the current industries, with the exception of the Gray Road landfill,
And
are
I'd
really
like to point
great
out,
neighbors.
it's not just greenhouses. There's also a commissary along there. There's also a La Rosa's commissary. There's a factory, which I've never figured out what it does, but it sits right there on the road. The point is, there are other things here.
Oh, yes.
Right.
Okay, go ahead.
Right. And by and large, those other facilities have been great neighbors. We've never had any concerns or complaints about, the moderate amount of truck traffic that they need to conduct their business. So we have no complaints about truly M1 light industrial development. The concern, too, is that Mr. Schweitzer has started several other landfills, or two other ones within the Cincinnati area, that he initially claimed he was filling in an area would start a light industrial park. And to my knowledge, the site in Arlington Heights has not been developed in that way, and the Elda landfill was a second landfill which he began. So we're not exactly sure that it's possible to build on this sort of landfill and that it will happen, given the history.
Joe, construction materials. I mean, we all like development. We all like to have this sense that the economy's booming, etc. It's got to go somewhere. Now, it happens, there's this not in my backyard, NIMBY approach. This happens to be literally in your backyards. But do you agree that is it that you're opposed to this kind of landfill here, or the way this particular landfill is being operated?
I think what we're opposed to would be the way it's being operated, definitely. It's always under par. Diane knows more of the history of that, but if you live on the road, you can understand it. We're opposed to the tremendous truck traffic. We can see it increasing as the years go on. This thing is supposed to be phasing down. It's phasing up. We've been noticing more dumpster units being brought up, brand new units on tractor trailers. I noticed 4 of them in the past 3 or 4 weeks. So the thing is on a growth, not a decline.
Yeah, one thing that I want to raise, I live in College Hill. I drive down that road all the time because I go to Xavier University for a lot of things. And one of the things I notice is there's a pylon. There's these huge electrical things that go through, and the hillside right beneath one of those is being shaved away. You can see it right there.
Correct.
What's the story on that? Is that dangerous? Now, I have to say, Mr. Schweitzer said it's not dangerous. What's your view?
One of our community members asked the city buildings and inspections folks to respond to that concern.
Father Jim Chappelle, right?
That's right. That's right. He expressed his concern about the stability in that area, and upon investigation, the inspectors wrote back and said that those pylons are apparently not threatened. However, the facility has undercut or cut too close to Winton Road, and that has created a stability problem for Winton Road. So they have ordered the operator to backfill in that area to increase the stability, and they also point out that he will be liable for any future damages in that area.
And on earlier tape that was up a little bit before, there was this black ash that was being put very close to Winton Road. That is that backfill, is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct. Let me read one more sentence that Mr. Schweitzer wrote, and he says, however, we have had an ongoing problem with a small faction of neighbors who view our operation as a nuisance, even though they chose to move into the industrial area, which has existed for over 100 years. Well, we sort of touched on that. Is this a small faction, or is there a larger community support for opposition? Joe?
No, the support for this would be all the way up and down the road, all through Winton Place, College Hill is going to get involved in this because the landfill is in the middle of all these residential areas.
We're down less than 30 seconds. Two things. One, there's a meeting this Tuesday afternoon at City Council, correct?
Correct.
In front of Charlie Winburn's committee.
Yes, 2 p.m.
2 p.m. And there's a community meeting?
That's right. The Whitten Place Community Council is hosting a town meeting to talk over this issue on August 17th, 7 p.m., the Gray Road Church of Christ.
Thank you for being here, and we'll follow this issue.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for making Newsmakers a part of your Sunday morning. Next week, I'll be joined by Jack Rouse, who is heading the Riverfront Planning Commission. He will update us on that plan, which will be made public in September. Have a good week.